Ladies and gentlemen, welcome here in het Spand in Bussen, our first OpenStack Benelux conference. Eric and I, we are both very excited to see you all here today. It's because of your interest in OpenStack, and I believe also your interest in the solutions of our sponsors. My name is Ruud Harmsen. I'm the founder and CEO of Fairbanks, and we have for quite a few years our focus on OpenStack. The last couple of years we did quite some implementations of OpenStack, and it was nearly a year ago I met the marketing director from the OpenStack Foundation, and she asked me actually three things. One was keep on doing your business with OpenStack in the Netherlands. Two, if we can be the community ambassador for OpenStack in the Benelux, and if it's possible to organize an event for OpenStack. And I think, ladies and gentlemen, with all you're here today, Eric, I think we can say, yes, we can. Eric, what do you think?
Ruud, I'm so excited. Look, we have between 300 and 400 people here. 400 people who have the same interest or maybe even passion for OpenStack. It's a few months ago only that you walked into my office and said, Eric, we have to create an OpenStack Benelux event. We can pull this off. And we would be happy if we would have had 150 people. It's at least double and even more today. But it's not only people, it's also companies who are in this building and helping us. So one of the things we have to do today is thank our sponsors. So I want to have an applause from you, from our sponsors, for our sponsors who make this event happen for free, pay for your lunch, and pay for the drinks afterwards. Please give an applause for the platinum sponsors, Red Hat, SUSE, HP, Cisco, and our gold sponsors, eVault, Seagate Company, Dell, Cloud VPS, Splendid Data, and Arista. Thank you. Ruud, what are we going to do today?
Well, if you're going to show the agenda, Eric, then we can see what we're going to do. Thank you. And it's typically Dutch, Eric. We made this joke this morning to say, it's typically Dutch to say that everything is for free today. So enjoy your day. What are we going to do this morning? Within a couple of seconds, I will introduce you to the first speaker. After that, I'm going to introduce Mark Samson from Cisco. After Mark, we're going to have the presentation from SUSE. After that, we have a short coffee break and a small celebration, but I will explain to you later on. I'm very proud that he is here, the chairman of the board of the OpenStack Foundation. Please welcome Mr. Alan Clark.
Well, thank you very much for that introduction. I appreciate the opportunity to be here. I bring greetings from the board members and the technical council. I was actually on the phone call with them till about midnight last night. Many of your colleagues from Cisco, HP, Red Hat, Dell, and many others on the phone call talking about the latest issues and challenges within OpenStack. Jonathan, our executive director, shared with me some of the latest community statistics, and these are actually about a month old, so they're out of date already. But just to give you an idea of how fast this is growing, it's a very new project, right? OpenStack is literally only about 4 years old. And to go from a handful of engineers to over 17,000 members in 4 years is dramatically amazing, okay? So when I say we as a board, we're talking about issues, one of them is growth, right? That's a dramatic amount of people that are participating in OpenStack from around the world, okay? So it's not just a North America or a European, but it's worldwide. We have real heavy participation, of course, in North America, but great participation out of Asia and as I mentioned, around the world in Europe. The number of contributors has dramatically grown. We've got over 2,000 people that are now contributing code. Okay, so 17,000 members, 2,000 people contributing code. It was interesting, when OpenStack started, we started with 2 components, right? Everybody knows the storage and the compute modules. And I'll show you a slide here in a minute that shows how many more components there are today. And one of the concerns we had about a year ago is, as all these new components started arriving and beginning in OpenStack, we were afraid that with the number of participants we had, they would start to be diluted and we wouldn't get anything done because they were scattered on all the different projects. But just the opposite has happened. We actually have more people contributing now than we have ever had before. And they're contributing a lot. If you look at the number of patches, and again, I'll show you a statistic here in a little bit, but if you look at the number of patches and the number of commits and features that are going into OpenStack in every one of our releases, it's very much equivalent to the size of the Linux kernel project. That's a project, an open source project that's 20 years old. And so we're reaching that same level within the last 4 years. It's pretty amazing. We have over 390 different organizations that are participating in OpenStack as members, sponsors, and supporters. Dramatic growth, and it's very positive. But outside of the community, I wanted to throw this slide up really quick as well, just to give you an idea of the type of traffic, the type of visual awareness that's happening around OpenStack. By the way, I was going to ask a question. How many here are members? When I say 17,000, how many are members? See, so few, but not everybody. So out of the 17,000, we still have a whole bunch of people that are interested in OpenStack and are coming to OpenStack not as members, but as interested parties that are interested in the material and understanding what it is. So unique visitors is way up. The traffic on our marketing and materials and YouTubes and documentation is dramatically grown. It's very exciting thing to be a part of. There we go. Got it back up here. I like to throw this slide up because to talk just briefly about the mission of OpenStack. So for those that are new, OpenStack is all about creating an open source cloud computing platform that meets the needs of both private and public cloud providers, regardless of size. And we want to make it simple to implement and make it scalable, okay? Massively scalable. That hasn't changed. That was our mission when we created the foundation 2 years ago. The mission hasn't changed. The project in scope has, as you'll see here in a second, has greatly grown, but our mission hasn't changed. That's what we're still driving for. And as I mentioned in that first slide, we have a lot. My slide's actually out of date here. I couldn't fit 390 logos on the slide. But we have heavy participation from not just companies, but research organizations, governments, all type of nonprofit organizations are all participating in OpenStack. But the one thing I wanted to point out that I found very interesting on this slide is the type of vendors that are involved. I mean, if you look at the sponsors today, if you look at our 390 list, we have the top 3, at least the top 3 vendors in many of the industry categories. So if you think about networking, routers, x86 hardware vendors, blade vendors, Linux distributors, switches, storage, hypervisor vendors, containers, vendors that are developing containers and so forth. We have at least the top 3 vendors in each of those categories participating in OpenStack. Okay? So that's pretty impressive on its own, but when you look back at those folks that are contributing, a lot of those folks are from those top vendors. Okay? So what that means is we're getting the top talent in the industry that's participating and contributing code into OpenStack. That's why you're seeing such rapid development and growth within the project itself and the features that are being produced through OpenStack. Another thing that has not changed is our principles. Okay? So when we started OpenStack and started the development, we said it's got to be open. It's all open source. Okay? It's not partially open, it's not closed. It's not open core, it's open source. So all our code is open, it's freely open, it's governed by the Apache license. All our documentation and wiki pages and all that media and so forth is developed under the Creative Commons license. So it's all freely available. The process we use to develop our software is open and transparent. We very much try to be transparent. So we go through a cycle every 6 months, where we do a release every 6 months. We begin that release cycle with each project developing what we call blueprints. Okay, those blueprints are a set of, think of them as features, the ideas that we want to cover within that next 6-month cycle. So you can go out there on our website and actually look at those blueprints. You want to know what's going to come in the next release? Go check out the blueprints. Okay. So we get together, they design, and the engineers get together and talk about those blueprints, categorize them and prioritize them, and when we go into the summits, so we begin each of our 6-month cycle with a summit. As we mentioned, the next one's coming up in Paris in November, and those summits are not just a business conference, but they're an actual design session where the engineers get together and talk about those features, assign people, volunteer and say, I'm going to work on that feature and supply code. But it's not just the code that gets worked on there. Also, things like user interfaces and documentation and so forth. So that begins the cycle, and then what you'll see is part of this transparency is all our meetings and discussions are held online. So looking back at that first slide, if you recognize OpenStack is worldwide, you pretty much can't do a phone call because it's the middle of the night for somebody somewhere, right? And so a lot of our work is done online through simple channels like IRC and through wiki pages and so forth, and mailing lists. Because we had to find the lowest common denominator so that everybody could communicate. So you'll find that we have weekly meetings where each of the projects are discussed, and they basically do the project management cycles where we're going through weekly and discussing the progress on each of those blueprints, doing lack of progress or good progress, where we're at, and we go through the whole release cycle. Until we get to the end, we do an integrated release, and then we start the process all over again. So it's all up there on the website. You can go check it out. It's great because it's open source. It's bad because it's open source. Those that don't like us can go up there and find all the dirt they ever wanted to know about OpenStack and declare all kinds of wonderful things about us. But on the same time, you know exactly what we're working on and where we're heading. So it's all open and transparent. The last point here is it's an open community. So as I mentioned, we have 17,000 members, 2,000 of which are coding. What are the rest of them doing, right? That's 15,000 people. What are they doing? The beauty of an open community is that people can come in and participate with the talents that they have. It's not just about coding, but it's also about sharing your talent. We have people who come in. We've had a couple of books written that are open source books. There's an operator's guide and there's an architect's guide up there now. Folks got together, had a scrum, and over a weekend wrote a book. And so you can go download those books. We have folks from marketing that participate. They come in and have put several events together. We've had some operator summits and so forth. And they're developing white papers, they're developing use cases, right? We have lawyers that come in and they're talking about intellectual property rights, not just about OpenStack, but the cloud industry as a whole. We have users. We have a user committee. That was one of the first things we formed, is a user committee. The user committee talks about best cases, best use cases. And they've been very focused on the operator community, and they've held a couple of summits lately. And from that, they're taking those use cases, their best practices, and they're turning those into blueprints, okay? A couple of extensions have come out of that, one of which is now focused on the end user, so the folks that are actually using the cloud. And we're trying to gather the data and best practices and use cases for those folks. And again, we'll turn those into blueprints to go back into the community. Another group that we're very focused on is a couple more examples, the telcos. The telcos have gotten together as a group within OpenStack discussing their needs. There's a new initiative called NFV, and what you'll see in Juno is feedback from that group turned into blueprints that are turning into features that'll be part of the next release of OpenStack. Another group that's gotten organized within the community is focused on the private enterprise. And so we have a work effort underway where product managers have become involved in an effort we call Win the Enterprise. And this group is focused on not just the technical issues, but the marketing issues, okay? Looking at the analyst reports, looking at the press, figuring out what they're saying our shortcomings are, and turning those into, do we need a new marketing message? Do we need different user reports? And also looking at the technology gaps. What are the technology gaps that are needed for the private enterprise? So, those folks kicked off that effort at our last summit in Atlanta, and are in that same process of putting together best practices, and we'll turn those into blueprints that they're going to be discussing at the summit in Paris, and again, we'll turn those into features for the upcoming releases. A lot of different talents, a lot of different people from around the world that are participating and coming and bringing their ideas on how to make OpenStack better. Now, as I mentioned, OpenStack has grown dramatically. When OpenStack first started, there was the two components. As part of the integrated release, there's now about 10 components, depending on how you count them, if you count shared services or not. But there's about 26 different components that are under construction within OpenStack. And we don't have time in this session, but in the next session, I'm going to dive a little deeper into each one of these components and talk about the different layers and what they bring into OpenStack. But there's a lot of work. There's a lot of different pieces to cloud. And it's very exciting to see the growth that's happening. And so I'll delve into this slide a little later in my next presentation, but just to give you an idea of how much OpenStack has grown and how much it's encompassing the benefits of cloud. So let's talk about you as an individual for a minute. Why in the heck would you want to participate in an open source project? Well, it turns out that the industry has really changed. When I first got into open source many years ago, everybody looked at open source as kind of being the follower in the industry, right? So open source was looked at, oh, they're going to take what the other guy is doing and reinvent it and repeat it, right? So it was very much an industry follower. But it's flipped. It's really flipped. Now what we're finding in open source is that it's the leading edge of the industry. People are coming to open source because they can easily try out new things. So a benefit for you in participating in open source is that it's very easy to come and try out new tools, okay? And try out new development practices. Okay, so expand your knowledge. You're expanding your knowledge base by trying out these new tools and these new development practices, and you're able to draw on the expertise of other people in the industry. So you're no longer confined to your buddies down the hall that are part of your same company, right? But you get to leverage the expertise of those around the industry. Think about all these experts in all these companies that all of a sudden you get to talk to and leverage their knowledge and expertise. That helps you grow your knowledge and expertise, which advances your professional network, right? And advances your career by networking and gaining knowledge. All of a sudden, you've got greater skill set, which makes you more viable for other opportunities. And then the next idea is just there's a simple sense of satisfaction, right? Just being part of something that is a scale of a worldwide scale. It's no longer just a project within my company on the 6th floor of whatever building I'm in, but I'm part of something that's worldwide. And so it gives you, being part of that and checking code in gives you this very interesting sense of satisfaction. Now, as I mentioned, we have 17,000 members. They're not all participating by committing code. So we did a survey. The Linux Foundation actually did a survey and asked developers, how do you participate in open source communities? And the top answer was, well, I'm using open source tools. Okay? So the first thing people do is they get involved by just using the tools. They pick up some little tool and give it a try. The next thing that happens is that starts to get incorporated into commercial products. The third answer that came back was they begin to participate in open source events. Okay? So they come to events like today, and then they start to go to events like our summits and so forth. Then they begin to participate by testing the software, submitting bug reports, doing code reviews, and so forth. They begin to get that knowledge and understanding of how the code works. And then lastly, they begin to be active contributors to code, or actively contributing code to the project. So you begin as a user, and my experience is you get sucked in and start participating and actually producing code. It's kind of a natural progression. But the benefit to you, so there's benefits directly to you, but there's also benefits to the enterprise. And I'm going to talk kind of about private cloud here, but it's actually very similar with the public cloud audience. So why would an enterprise want to participate in open source? So again, we did a survey, and the top answer that came back was enterprises, businesses like to participate in open source because it shortens their development cycle. Okay? It reduces their cost. By them being able to go out, grab open source, and use it, they've just shortened their development cycle. Okay? But the second answer that came back is, I want to make sure I get the order correct here. They're finding out that it helps them advance their business objectives. Okay? So remember I said it started out open source was the follower in the industry? Today it's flipped. It's now the leading part of the industry. So by businesses adopting open source, they're able to adopt those leading initiatives into their products much faster than they were able to as a proprietary source. The third answer was faster to market, which makes sense, right? If I'm able to shorten my development cycle, if I'm able to get that leading edge technology sooner, I'm faster to market. So by using open source, I'm faster to market. And then fourth answer was that reduces my cost. Okay, so I've reduced my engineering and development costs, so my product cost goes down. Now, the flip side of this, so that's kind of the folks that are developing software, but the other phenomenon is the folks that are using open source software. So the businesses that are using open source software, the benefit that they're finding is they're able to have a better relationship with their vendors. They're able to have a relationship with others that are using the software. So their participation their motivation for participating in open source isn't that they necessarily want to modify the code, but it's building the relationship. They begin to have a relationship with not just the salesperson, but the actual engineers that are writing the code, the folks that are designing the interfaces, the folks that are writing the documentation, and other folks that are using the software as well. So they again build that professional network of those that are involved with the software. But again, from the user's perspective, I've talked to a lot of businesses. They love open source not because they want to change the code, but they can go in and see and understand how it's working. Okay. I've spent many hours with particularly the finance folks, the stock exchange folks. Those guys love to look at the code because for them, a millisecond is big money, right? If they can save a second in their processing, it's big money to them and a competitive advantage. So they very much want to understand how the code works so that when they're writing their applications on top, they can make them run as rapidly as possible. So not necessarily wanting to change the code, but they want to understand how it works. And then the last reason that was listed was they want to influence the development. Okay, so I talked about our blueprint process where we're creating new features. They actually want to be involved in the process to help decide what the features are for the future. Okay, so it's no longer I'm just buying a black box product and having to use it as it is, but I can now influence how it's going to look in the future. Okay. Now, so OpenStack, we've had 9 releases. We're working on our 10th. Icehouse was the 9th that was released in April. We're going down the alphabet. For those, we started at A with Austin. We're now down to I. The next one is J, which I'll show you a slide here in a minute. And the one after that is K. So we're going down the alphabet. Icehouse, was released in April. We had 1,200 developers that contributed code to it. About 350 new features, which was actually down, believe it or not. The previous release had about almost 400, depending on how you count again, over 400, 420 features. And the reason is we paused a little bit and said we need to really work on stability of the code. And so we focused a lot on that. We had a lot of backlog of people wanting to submit patches, so we worked on that as well. So we worked on stability and maturity of the code. We raised the bar on testing and consistency with the code. But anyway, so there was a lot of new features. That's a lot of features in 6 months. It really is. About 3,000 commits, and we're now up to 16 different languages. Okay. The next release, as I mentioned, is Juno. This is what's coming out in October. And just to give you an idea of some of the themes that are happening, and this is just a sample because it's, like I said, there's going to be, I counted, and this is my count, going through the blueprints. So this isn't an official count. It could be higher, it could be lower, but roughly a little bit more than the last release. And as I mentioned, NFV, the telcos, right? Those guys are very interested in that. So there's a lot of support going in for NFV. We're working, we had some work on live upgrades as part of Icehouse. We've got more work coming in Juno. I'll talk about the scheduler in the next hour, but just to give you an idea, we've done some more work that's been going on since Folsom to decouple the scheduler in Nova. Adding in container support. So we already have hypervisor support for Zen, KVM, ESX, and Hyper-V. So now we're adding in support for Docker, so we've got container support. Bare metal management, database integration, NUMA, better token handling, this notion of identity federation, time series database as a service, IPMI support, and a lot of work going in Neutron, which is the networking component, particularly if you start talking about software-defined networks and so forth. So a lot of new technology, and a lot of this on this list, as I said, is leading-edge technology, right? So a lot of things happening coming up in the next release. And it's not going to slow down. It's just going to get more and more as we go along. And the next, when I get back up, I'm going to talk about use cases and drill down into some of the use cases of OpenStack. But as I mentioned, we have a user committee, and every 6 months they do a survey. And I just pulled out a little bit of data from that survey. And again, this is not exhaustive. One of the hard points of open source software is it's really hard to know who's using your code, because anybody can go out, you can go out there and download it and use it, and we have no idea what you did with it, right? So all we can do is ask. So this is not by any means an exhaustive list. It's just a sampling of some of the ways that OpenStack is being used. And but I went through those surveys to see where it's being used, okay? And these are some of the industries where OpenStack is being used today. So of course, in our information technology arena, right, IT, academic research and education, telecommunications, film, media, entertainment, government, defense, and police, manufacturing, industrial, retail, it's very big in retail, healthcare, finance, and consumer goods. So that's kind of the top 10 list of where OpenStack is being used. That's quite a variety of industries, and we'll talk more about that here in a minute. But it's getting used a lot in a lot of different places. And so, kind of winding up here, why OpenStack? There's other open source alternatives out there. Why is OpenStack being so successful, right? I've shown you a few slides here. Dramatic growth, a lot of momentum, a lot of new features. Why is OpenStack so successful? First answer is it's fun. It really is fun. It's fun to participate. Our goals are well understood. Our model of participation is well understood. People know how they can come in and join and participate. Second, it's open to everybody. Doesn't matter what your skill level is, you can come and participate in many different ways. It's new and it's different, so you can come in, do something new, and gain experience, okay? OpenStack has a good reputation. We've proven we can deliver. We've proven that we can work together, even as competitors in the industry. So we have great backing from what I showed, 390 different organizations. And I think the biggest reason is it's because we can participate in something that's great, right? Something that is worldwide, a worldwide phenomenon, and have fun doing it. So my last slide here, I want to invite you to come and participate. If you haven't, just come check it out. It's very easy to just talk to some of the stackers on OpenStack. Take a look at the IRC channels, sign up for the newsletters, participate in events like today. This is a great activity. The meetup group here in the Netherlands is huge. It's been very active since last year. The LinkedIn group is even larger. So there's a lot of ways just here locally to get involved and start to understand and ask questions, right? And participate in OpenStack. So I just wanted to invite you to do that. Go out and check out our website. Go out and check out the meetup group here. Get signed up and participate. And I believe that's it. It is. Okay. All right. Well, thank you.